I've been blind since birth. As I grew up, everything was described to me in such vivid detail that I didn't even realize why it was that important to see, especially having no reference point to compare it. We lived in a single-floor ranch house, that's what Father told me. In my mind, of course, I could see, although unlike how a sighted person could. I had spatial awareness. I knew where my bedroom was, where the bathroom, living room, and kitchen were. Each wall had its own texture. I don't know if that was done on purpose, or if I could feel things others never noticed. I rarely fell over. Only if Father, or one of the visitors, put something somewhere they shouldn't have. It was usually the visitors, and Father would shout. They visited infrequently, and only briefly when they did. Father said I shouldn't speak to them, that it unsettled him. He'd worry when I saw something he didn't, saw it with my ears or by touch. Ellie was the first. She seemed very sweet. She asked me my name and why my face was so messed up. She was in the living room. I could hear where she sat from her breaths. Harsh nasal sounds, as if her nose was blocked. When Father had a cold, he'd always breathe through his mouth, big labored breaths, as he wasn't used to it. When people mentioned my face, I always touched it, trying to work out why it was so strange to them. When I asked if I could touch theirs, there was always a pause. I guessed sighted people never did that. Why would they need to? When I asked Ellie if I could touch her face, she reluctantly agreed, but moments later Father entered the room and asked me who I was speaking to. I told him, nobody. He would always punish me when I spoke about them. I think it scared him. He'd take my arm and march me off. I'd be knocked off balance and disoriented, to the point where when he finally set me down, my hands would frantically search my surroundings until I knew where I was. It was usually my bedroom, though every now and then he'd leave me outside, in the middle of nowhere. That was the worst. I would be lost and scared. He told me about the road that ran in front of the house, and explained that the sounds I heard were cars, that they'd kill me if they touched me. Those sounds were my only means of recognizing my surroundings. I waited until I heard one, and then knew which way to run back to the house. I heard Ellie that evening. She whispered to me, saying she was scared. I whispered back, but she didn't hear. I asked Father about Ellie. He didn't want to talk about her. I asked him why. He didn't reply. When I told him that she asked about my face, he asked me how I responded. I told him I wanted to touch hers. He laughed, though I knew he wasn't happy. I could hear the difference. When you laugh for pleasure, your mouth is wide open. When you pretend, your mouth is almost closed. To me, the difference is obvious. It wasn't until I was older that he explained. He said we lived in a special place, connected to the other world. That sometimes dead people slipped through, people who died in pain and wanted to reach the living. He explained that because I couldn't see, I was able to tune into that. That they knew I was listening when others weren't. He said I had to ignore it. Otherwise, he told me, they'd latch on and never leave me. All the dead want is to be alive again, he said. It was dangerous, and they would trick me. He said he knew how to deal with them, but he couldn't help if they became attached to me. Alex appeared to me a few years later. She told me she was lost and didn't know where she was. I told her I wasn't allowed to speak to her. Still, she pleaded for help. I kept quiet, knowing what would happen if I said anything. Did you speak to them? Father asked. Though I was upset, I told him no. I wished I could help her. I knew what it was like to be lost, and it scared me. Alex didn't whisper to me at all. I'd ignored her, and she ignored me. Father saved me, and I was thankful. After Alex, I knew what I needed to do, so I did it. The spirits stopped bothering me after that, for a very long time. That was until Sarah appeared. Sarah didn't give me a chance to be quiet. I was on my own, sitting in the living room and listening to the television. Help, she said. I need to find a way out. I stayed silent. You can hear me, can't you? She asked, surprised. I'm not allowed to speak to you, I told her. Please, she begged. I'm scared, I'm lost. I want to see my daddy. I gripped the arms of the chair and told her I wasn't allowed. He's dead, she said. I didn't answer. Your father is dead, she said again. I wasn't going to fall for it. I heard banging from around the room as things began to fly, and the shelves began to shake. Stop it, I shouted. And it did. Please help me leave, she said. I wasn't going to talk to her. I did the only thing I thought would help. I unlocked the front door, hoping she'd run out and get lost, just like I would do. When I heard from her no more, I locked the door and sat back down. I listened intently for any signs she was still there. Except for the sounds of the TV, it was silent. I hated when my heart raced. I became all too aware of the tick-tock feeling of the rise and fall within my chest, like it was about to explode. When I heard my father's voice, I screamed. Son, he said, I need your help. I think I'm dying. I did what he told me to do. I didn't speak. If he did die, he'd never leave me. Instead, I raced out into the open air and shouted for help. I shouted until my voice was hoarse. I heard the sounds of cars racing along the road in front of my house. I shouted until I heard someone respond. It was a woman. What's wrong? They asked. I told them I think my father was dying. They asked what had happened to my face. I pleaded with them to help me, and they promised they would. I sat down on the grass and waited. Sometime later, the woman returned to me and asked if she could hold my hand. I'm so sorry, she told me. I heard the sounds of sirens and of people rushing. I asked what was going on. The woman said she was there for me. As the noise died down, a man asked me a question. I'm a paramedic, he said. What happened to your face? I told him I was fine. He asked if I was sure, and I told him I was. He asked if I minded him touching my face. I said it was okay. A moment later, I felt a pressure release from around my forehead and the air felt cold against my skin. It sounded as if he were peeling an orange. I imagined that in my head and worried he'd expose my insides. I screamed and asked what he was doing. He told me everything was going to be okay, and the woman squeezed my hand, telling me to be brave. I didn't know what it was I was experiencing. I felt a tight pain within my head, like when you smash your shin against something hard, followed by something I've come to understand as bright. It hurt so much. I began to cry. What happened to your eyes? The paramedic asked. I said I was blind. He asked to check them. The pain returned when he examined them. Do you know him? The man asked the woman who had helped me. She told him that I had been screaming for help and that she had come to my aid, but that she had never met me before. How long have you had your eye injury? He asked me. I told him I'd been blind from birth. He asked me if I could see his fingers. I told him no. He asked if I could open my eyes. I said I didn't know what he meant. He asked if he could open them for me. I didn't respond. Then I felt his fingers on my face, fingers covered in something rubbery. Suddenly, it became bright again. I screamed. He tried to calm me. The woman squeezed my hand again. I didn't know what was happening. Things I couldn't describe came to me. It was like it always was, but multiplied 100-fold, and so much more real. I carried on screaming as a fuzzy form came into view. Just breathe, okay? The paramedic said. Everything will be fine. When was the last time you saw? As my heart began to calm and my breathing slowed, I became distracted by what I was experiencing. It overwhelmed me. I wanted to cry, and I did. How long has it been? He asked again. I've never seen anything before, I told him. I was told to keep an eye mask on for most of the day, only taking it off at night at first, to allow my eyes time to adjust. At the same time, I was placed in the custody of my aunt and uncle, and didn't even know it at first. They were shocked at what happened to me, and that I had never attended school. The past few years have been a roller coaster ride. The doctor said I may never have perfect vision, but what little I have is a godsend, and I'll take what I can get. I've only recently been learning to read and write, so I apologize if my English isn't the greatest. It's the best I can do. I've been asking my aunt what happened to my father, but all she says is that he died of a heart attack. I asked what sort of man he was. She says he was her brother and she'll love him no matter what. My uncle doesn't want to talk about him at all. I've been using the computer a lot recently and really enjoying the internet. I can't believe such a thing exists. After being so lonely for so long, I can talk to whoever I want, when I want, though I'm wary of that. After all, how do I know if who I'm speaking to is alive? No one seems to share my father's concerns about that. Today, I was on a forum discussing the spirit world. I was so happy to find people who I could relate to, and someone curious about my username sent me a link to an article on a true crime website. It was about my father, and mentioned me by name. They asked me who I was, and if I was the same person. According to the article, my mother had gone missing soon after my birth. It said I'd been bound so that I couldn't see. That my father always wanted a daughter. They found 14 bodies in the basement. They said one got away, a girl by the name of Sarah Frank. She was the one to call the police. They found father's car parked around the back of the house. They supposed he carried his victims into the basement via the storm entrance and left them there. Sarah had managed to get away after she agreed to be his daughter following 4 days of sustained torture. She stabbed him with a knife he placed on the counter to butter some toast. I didn't want to believe it. And I am not sure I would have if it weren't for the names of the victims, 2 of which stuck out, Ellie Farmer and Alex Riddle. I'd spoken to them both in the living room. To this day, I wonder if my father had been honest with me about a single thing in his life. Throughout it all, one question remains above all others. Did I speak to Ellie and Alex before or after he killed them? Scoutmaster Tom sat with his troop around the campfire. It was their first overnight trip and the 5 boys were all giddy with excitement. All around them the woods echoed with the song of chirping crickets and gentle breezes. The boys roasted their s'mores while chatting about girls using a vocabulary that Tom deemed not suitable for 10-year-olds. Hey, watch the language, boys. We may be in the woods, but we are not animals. The scouts laughed and shook their heads. I'm sorry, I thought this was supposed to be the big make men out of us trip. Johnny said with a smile. Yes it is, but we are scouts, not sailors. So I suggest you take things down a couple of notches or you will be sleeping out here all night. Find something else to talk about. How about a ghost story? Mark asked. This seemed to excite the boys and they turned towards their elder with wide eyes. Tom chuckled and shook his head. Oh, come on, you said you have been in the Scouts since you were our age. You must have heard some great stories around your campfires growing up. Frank encouraged. Tom sighed. He wasn't sure if the boys were ready for this story, but he knew they wouldn't leave him alone without hearing one. Okay boys, I do have one, but I did not hear this around a campfire. This story was something that happened to me. The boys became more interested and an ominous wind blew through the camp making the fire dance, making for perfect ambience. It was during my first overnight camping trip on a night just like tonight. Tom said in his best creepy voice. Justin laughed. Let me guess, it was in this very woods. Tom looked at him with dead seriousness. Yes. The boys looked shocked and leaned in closer. It was the night of a full moon and the forest was brimming with a sinister energy. We talked about what we would do if werewolves or vampires stormed our camp. We laughed about it then, but we were unaware about the very real monster lurking just beyond the trees. The wind picked up again, shaking the trees around them and sending a shiver down all the boys' backs. I awoke in the middle of the night feeling my own call of nature. I left the tent to relieve myself, and when I came back I noticed something incredible. On the ground in our camp was a very clear and equally fresh set of deer tracks. I was excited because in all of our nature walks we had never encountered an actual deer. My mind drifted to my bag where I had a particular item stored. It is an unwritten Boy Scout rule that a camper would bring at least one banned item with them. Most bought things like Game Boys or an adult magazine. For me though, I bought my Polaroid camera. I wanted a picture of that deer and rules about venturing alone at night. Be damned, I was going to get it. Now all I wish was that I had gone to bed and shut my eyes tight. The boys around the fire were speechless. This was the most quiet Tom had ever seen them. Even the woods seemed to quiet down, as if nature wanted to listen in. I quietly grabbed my camera from my pack and then ran out into the night following the tracks of the deer. I was initially worried about venturing through the darkness, however the shining full moon above provided the perfect lighting. I was very thankful for that, because a sprained ankle from stepping in a hole would have ruined the trip for everyone, and my fellow scouts would never let me hear the end of it. As I walked through the shadowy trees, I could feel the eyes of the animals in the forest glued to me, tracking my every step. I began to feel afraid and considered turning around, but I knew that the deer could not have gotten far. I followed the tracks intently, but that was when I noticed something strange was happening to them. "What was it?" Mitchell asked with a genuine tone of fear in his voice. "I noticed that they were getting bigger," Tom said, sending a quiet gasp through the boys. The tracks seemed to increase in size with every step. First I thought maybe the deer was increasing speed and therefore pressure, but they were getting far too big for any deer on record. Then something far stranger happened. The tracks began to change shape. The hoof print grew longer and narrower. The foot had begun to grow toes, and each one was tipped with an increasingly long claw. A single word flashed in my mind: wolf. My heart beat in my chest and I considered turning around, but I took a closer look instead. It didn't take me long to figure out that whatever these tracks were, they were not wolf tracks. Wolves had more rounded feet, but this was long and damn it almost human in nature. My mind swirled with the stories of werewolves we were telling earlier, but I shook my head in denial. Nothing about the nature of these tracks made sense. I had to follow them further. I continued my journey, watching the tracks morph in front of me. They became more skeletal, and yet each track sunk deeper into the ground, indicating a great change in weight. They started looking less humanish and more monstrous. At the mention of monsters, a strange sound emitted from the bush just beyond the camp. Tom wasted no time in shining his emergency light at the brush, but found no sign of what made the noise. He sat down and continued the tale for his captive audience. The tracks took me deeper into the woods, where even the light of the moon struggled to pierce. With every step, I could feel the beat in my chest grow louder and louder. Finally, the trail led to what I could only assume was the lair of the beast. There was a small cave with moss hanging down in front of its mouth. I began to shake and slowly back away. It wasn't the darkness of the cave or what lay within its depths that frightened me, but the smell. The cave radiated with a smell that was horrible beyond measure. I wouldn't understand the smell till years later, when I found a dead gopher under my house. It was the smell of decay, the smell of death. I feared whatever made that smell and was about to turn around. That was when I heard a sound come from in the cave. All 12 eyes around the campfire were glued to the scoutmaster. The boys were completely enthralled, and Tom knew it was time to finish his tale. The sound was a strange one that I still can't completely identify. On the surface it sounded like a growl, but there was the slightest hint of something behind it, something human. It was then that the forest truly came alive. As if summoned by the creature's growl, every animal, every insect in the forest erupted into their own cries. The sound was completely deafening, to the point where I thought my ears would burst. I didn't understand how the others at camp didn't hear it. Suddenly, I felt a tap at my shoulder, and I swear I could feel my soul leaving my body. I jolted up, and there was my fellow scout Donnie staring at me. Relief burst through me, and I noticed that the animal calls had stopped, as if they never existed. Donnie asked me what I was doing out of bed, and I told him of the tracks. I was about to say that we should head back when I saw something that made my blood freeze, despite the summer heat. Behind Donnie, I could see his tracks in the dirt, and they did not come from the direction of camp. The tracks came directly from the cave. I shook in fear, and Donnie stared at me with a smile that bordered on macabre. I looked into my friend's green eyes that were almost glowing in the moonlight. Were his eyes always green? I asked myself. Donnie's smile grew, and maybe it was the trick of the light, but I thought I saw pointed fangs in his mouth. "Come on, Tommy, there is something I want to show you. Trust me, you will remember it forever." I followed his finger, and he was pointing into the cave. I shook my head and took a step back, but he continued to point. "Come, my friend, join me. I can show you such wonders." His eyes grew brighter and shone almost like a cat's eyes. He began to inch towards me with his hand outstretched, and I noticed that his fingers were clawed. That was enough for me, and I ran towards our camp. I didn't dare turn back for the life of me, but I could hear him following. Every step the thing took caused a louder boom, and each one was closer to me. There was no way I could outrun this beast. Then inspiration struck me like a bolt of lightning. I grabbed my Polaroid camera, aimed it behind me, and snapped a picture. The intense flash of the camera had its desired effect and blinded the beast. I could hear a mighty roar from behind me, and I finally made it to camp. I ran straight into my tent, and to my surprise, Donnie was in his sleeping bag. I almost ran back out again, but he lay snoring away, and I knew this was the real Donnie. I got in my sleeping bag and stared at the tent flap, just waiting for a claw to swipe down it. I don't know how long I stared at the door, but I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew it was morning. I couldn't believe that I had survived the night. In the light of day, realism began to wash over me, and I figured that I must have dreamed the whole encounter. We packed up, and I was relieved to be leaving. However, as we were marching down the trail, I noticed something laying on the ground. The unmistakable back of a Polaroid picture. I trembled as I picked it up, and when I turned it over, I almost screamed. The picture was extremely blurry, but I thought I could make out two glowing green eyes and what looked like a set of razor-sharp teeth. The boys all let out a sigh. "Why didn't you tell anyone about the picture?" Justin asked. Tom shrugged. To this day, I maintain that I must have been sleepwalking and took a picture. Frank shook his head. But the eyes. Tom laughed. Most likely just fireflies, but who knows? The picture was too blurry to tell anything. The boys continued to argue about whether or not it was a dream. They argued about what type of creature it might have been. Tom simply smiled to himself. He had chosen a good story, and everyone was enthralled by it. In fact, they were all so enthralled that no one, not even the scoutmaster, noticed that there were now 6 boys instead of 5. No one noticed until it was too late. A bit of context: my father left my mother not long after I was born. He was a selfish and incredulous man, driven by his own will and desires. Whether I'm his only child, we don't know, but we're skeptical that I'm not. I would visit him as a child and stay over at his house, the usual divorced parents with a child scenario. As I got older, the visits got fewer and fewer, and we clashed a lot, both being defiant about the other. Eventually, the visits stopped. I couldn't take the arguing, the heartache, or the rejection from my own father. It was too much. To no avail, we tried to rekindle our relationship multiple times. It only caused more heartache and pain, and gradually we drifted apart. He knows nothing about me now that I am in my 20s, and I'd like to keep it that way. But I know plenty about him. He's blocked on every social media site, any form of contact has been severed by me, but every now and then I get curious. I want to see what he's up to. So I started making stops by his house. He lives on the other side of town, but I find ways of getting there secretly. My mother knows I do this, but she isn't aware of how often. I slivered to his house at night, shielded by the dark. I peeped through his backyard fence and into his kitchen, just watching him. Watching him with his new family and watching him live his new life. I've seen his stepchildren grow. I've seen his grandchildren come and go for weekend visits. I used to be jealous, but not anymore. No. Now I am intrigued. I like to tease my father about the daughter that he forgot and moved on from. I place little reminders of me in his backyard, next to his back door. A childhood toy, an item of clothing. Something that makes his heart swell and his mind ache, a little reminder that I still exist, despite his lack of contact with me. I even posted one of my graduation photos through his door one Easter morning. Now that took some balls. But lately, I've become addicted to visiting his house after dark. It's like I can't get enough of watching his life unfold through his kitchen window. I gaze and I stare through the little cracks in his fence, watching his and his family's every move. I often feel a sense of loss and grief, but not for long. But last night was different. I had paid him a visit around 10 p.m., twice to be exact. The first time went unnoticed, as usual. I hid and I watched, his eyes transfixed by his phone. The second time, around 20 minutes later, I snuck up to the fence again, holding my breath and watching. This time, he made his way to the back door, and I watched, curious to see if he'd notice me and terrified if he did. But I was frozen to my spot, to my ritualistic hiding place. I didn't know what to do. I watched through the fence, holding my breath. He made his way to the bin, disposing of something before slinking back inside. I let out a brief sigh of relief and continued to watch. He slunk about his kitchen, tidying up and putting the kettle on for a late-night drink. All the time I watched, and I watched, and I watched. It felt like I was there for hours. I watched as the light went out and figured he must have made his way upstairs. I then had a sudden idea, a longing feeling, to go inside and be with him. So, I snuck into his backyard, quiet and stealthy. He didn't know I was there, nobody did. I heard a baby's cry come from upstairs, and I watched eagerly from below as a light went on. I saw a silhouette make their way to what must have been the baby's crib. Then another light came on, the landing light, and soon the kitchen light followed. I dove beneath the kitchen window, anxiety swirling through my veins, my heart pummeling my chest. I could hear the clatter of dishes as someone prepared a bottle for the baby, whom I presumed to be the youngest grandchild. The noise then stopped, and I heard footsteps leading away from the kitchen, but the light stayed on. Curiosity overcame me, and I looked through the kitchen window, dying to catch a closer glimpse of his other life, the life he had left me and my mother for. The life he had disregarded me for. I took in the surroundings and saw the glitz and glam of what I guessed to be his new kitchen, and anger swirled inside of me. Me and my mother have never been very well off, so seeing his glamorous life, even if it only involved a kitchen, upset me. Our house was a shambles, falling apart, whereas his house was pristine and new. I stood gawking through the window for what seemed like a decade before I could hear footsteps coming down the stairs again. I waited until the last minute to duck beneath the window, managing to catch a small glimpse of my father, now aged and tired. He looked terrible, nothing at all like the man I had cut contact with. I waited and waited and waited, all the while holding my breath like my life depended on it. After what seemed like a century, the kitchen light flickered and then went out. Unusual given that it was a new kitchen. I took this as an opportunity to peep through the window once more, even though I hadn't heard retreating footsteps. I raised my head so that my eyes could see over the windowsill. I watched him through the darkness. I felt lost and sad. All I ever wanted was to be loved by him. Unknowingly, I stretched my hand up to the window, silently pressing my palm against the glass. I just wanted to be closer to him. I wanted a dad. My dad. I heard a gasp and a clatter as he must have seen me. Rushed footsteps echoed towards the back door, and by then I knew I had been caught, but what did it matter anymore? I was about to see my dad. He threw open his back door and stood on the doorstep, bewildered and afraid. I stood before him, but he couldn't see me. He couldn't see anything. His confusion and fear made me smile a little, a small revenge for all the heartache he had caused me as a child. A breeze passed through the yard. He shivered before turning away, locking the door, and retreating upstairs, back to his new family. It's been a few years since I lost my life to a drunk driver, but I still like to visit my dad. I like to remind him that I'm still here, still watching. I am still waiting for the love and life I never received from him. Tonight, I think I'm going to go inside and pay him a visit. Tonight, I think I'll properly make myself known so that he can never forget me. Tonight, I'll make sure he remembers the child he left behind.
My friend sent me an online quiz, and its questions became unsettling. Me and a friend of mine started chatting online, and got to sending each other increasingly funny online quizzes. You know those ones that tell you which member of a band or which Disney princess or whatever else you are?
Okay, I found another one. It's called What Fast Food Restaurant Are You?
And? Did you find out?
I haven't finished yet.
Alright, send me the link. We went back and forth like this for a while. He'd keep looking for new quizzes, share his results, and I'd try them too. By the time I'd finished, he'd have another one ready. I got up to get some water, leaving my laptop on the couch. Once I'd come back, he had, of course, sent me another link.
Dude, take a look at this.
I clicked the link, expecting another quiz. I was surprised, however, by the rather plain page that greeted white background, Arial text, and only the all-caps word quiz in bold at its top. Below it was a question: what is your favorite color? I picked blue from a selection of colors, and the next question appeared on screen. The first few I went through were relatively mundane. Things like whether I preferred cats or dogs, pepperoni or cheese pizza, etc. Nothing non-standard for these quizzes. I had just answered whether I was an introvert or extrovert when I noticed that the next question had a free response box. What is your name? It read. Tentatively, I typed my first name in the box and pressed enter. I have a common enough name that I didn't feel too uncomfortable sharing it. The question following it, however, was even more bizarre. It was, again, free response, and this time said simply where do you live? I tabbed out of the site to message to my friend again. Why are the questions on this one so weird? I idled for a couple minutes but didn't receive a response. Tiring of the wait, I returned to the quiz page. I reread the words. Where do you live? I couldn't move on without submitting an answer, so I just pressed space to leave the query blank before moving on. Unfortunately, this didn't allow me to progress, red text appearing below the box telling me I had to input a valid location. I tried inputting a real location, New York, and the red text changed to say only incorrect. I refreshed and reopened the page to no avail. It's not letting me keep going. Do you have any other ones? This one kinda sucks? This time, my friend responded.
It gets good, I promise. Just answer these ones.
I don't want to give this site where I live though.
You'll be fine. The payoff is worth it.
So I entered the name of the town I live in. Then, it allowed me to continue to the next question. How did it know that the answer I put in was correct? Not receiving an immediate response, I looked at the next question. It was back to multiple choice with a binary yes or no option. Are you alone right now? Unsettled, I glanced around the room. I pressed no and tried to continue, but the next question wouldn't load. I tried pressing yes instead and, to my dismay, I was able to advance. Okay, this is getting really creepy. I think I'm gonna stop now.
Keep going. Just trust me, please. I'm sure you're almost at the end.
Okay, fine, but if it gets any weirder, I'm bailing. I read the question. Can I come inside? There were no options to select, only the text. Then I heard a sound emanating from the front of my house. Knocking. My blood ran cold as the sound continued in short, sparse bursts. What the damn thing is this? When I looked at my laptop again, the words on the screen had changed. No longer a question, but now a command. Let me in.